Commissioner, as you see, we gave you a bit of margin there so that you could wind up. But in the course of the debate, please try to stick to speaking time. Let's start with the first set of questions, and I'll give the floor to Ivo Belet for his question.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Vella, I'm here at your right side. Very warm welcome in our committee. In your answer to our questions, parliamentary questions, you say that you want to continue the evaluation and also the possible reform of the Habitats and Birds Directive and prepare for, as you call it, a merge of the directives into a modern piece of legislation, end of quote. Of course, we're not against that, but first of all, our priority of the EPP group is first of all a pragmatic implementation of these directives and of course the implementation, correct implementation and the same implementation for all member states. Above all, also a correct interpretation by the Maltese government, because you were a member of that government and we know that the Maltese government weakened the interpretation of these birds directives, which has been heavily criticized. I have two particular questions. First of all, how do you intend concretely to reform it? And second, how do you want to deal with that exception, that derogation by the Maltese government that is weakened, and how do you want it to be interpreted in a correct way? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Belet, and let me start from your last question with regards to the directives in Malta. First of all, I want to make it very clear that I myself am neither a hunter nor a bird trapper, so you can set your mind at rest on that. And I can outrightly say that I condemn any illegal hunting. And another thing which I want to make very clear is that I am not here as a commissioner for Malta. I do come from Malta, but I am here as a commissioner for the European Union. And my interests are the interests of the European Union. And as such, I would expect each and every member state to implement all the directives, whether they be the country I know most or any other member state when it comes to that. And with regards to the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive, and any other directive, I would simply say that abuse cannot be tolerated. And as I said earlier on, it is not my role here to defend Malta. But coming back to the Birds Directive, I think you are very right. I think both these directives were the cornerstone to safeguard our ecosystems, to safeguard also our biodiversity. And I have taken note of your concerns. The only thing that I would like to say is that the Birds Directive was adopted in 1979, some 35 years ago, and it has never been reviewed since then. Most of the interpretation of the Bird Directive is not actually from the directive itself, but there have been some 30-odd court cases, and everyone is interpreting this Bird Directive simply from the court cases and not from the directive itself. Plus the fact that since 35 years, science has made giant steps, and I do not believe that science was actually envisaged 35 years ago when that Bird Directive. So again, reviewing is not revising, and in anything I would do, I would simply consult with... Yes.
Sorry, but we have to respect the time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Second question to Matthias Groth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vella. Your portfolio isn't just a portfolio covering the environment. There are other areas that you will be in charge of, and which you talked about in your presentation. For our group, the question arises as how can you ensure that this political area will be taken into account enough in your future work? And this question of sustainability on the Environment Committee, it's very important, and that's going to be dealt with at the Vice President level in the new structure of the Commission. And there, of course, our question is, how are you going to guarantee, as a competent Commissioner for environment, that resource efficiency, the green economy, that these are then reflected in legislative work and given proper priority in legislative work, priority that it deserves. Mr. Juncker, in his speech, talked about the 300 million euros being invested in this area. How will you accompany that in your portfolio, and how will you follow this up? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Grotto. And I could sense this sense of concern about the portfolio, the size of this portfolio, the fact that the environment has been added to fisheries, but I would like to make it very clear also that DG Mare, the maritime, the portfolio of maritime affairs and fisheries is not simply fisheries. It goes well beyond that. My portfolio is also responsible for the governance of the ocean, and this is where there is a lot of link between the environment and DG Mare. Let us not forget that very often when we speak about the environment, we're referring to the environment on land, so on and so forth. But keep in mind that our planet is made up of 30% of land and 70% of the oceans. And I think that both portfolios can work together. I think they could reinforce rather than diminish each other. And if we're going to talk about the future is all about, Mr. Grote, you mentioned sustainability. The future is all about sustainability. If someone were to ask me, and I made this point even during my meetings with some of the MEPs, what has the environment got to do with fishing? I would say nothing. What does the environment has to do with economy? I would say nothing. But the environment has got a lot to do with sustainable fishing. The environment has got a lot to do with sustainable economy. And I think if we're going to look at the future, we cannot talk about economy. We have to start talking about sustainable economy. I think the work can still be handled because both the services are going to be kept there, so there is no one portfolio moving at the expense of the other.
Grazie. Adesso la parola.
Thank you. And now Mr. Pieczka has the floor.
Mr. Commissaire, I will ask you about this very important problem, shale gas. What will you do ensure that the Commission's review of the recommendation of minimum principles for the exploration and production of the hydrocarbons using high-volume hydraulic fracturing takes account of adequate evidence of the practical implementation and does not result in unnecessary proposal for legislation? Will you be able to resist political and ideological pressure to introduce legislation at the EU level if there is no real need for it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pieka. And here we have already an issue which is highly linked to environment as well. First of all, let me point out that it is the Member States' decision with regards to the energy mix adopted in the particular Member State. It is not up to the Commissioner to decide on that. My role would be, if any Member State opts for shale gas, then my role would be to see that any operation in that regards is done in accordance with the protection for the environment, also according to the treaty. The important thing is that if any Member State decides to go for shale gas, they have to do it in the proper way. I think we have learned, or we should learn as well, from past mistakes. I know that the Commission at least from the information that I was given, has launched in January the shale gas initiative, basically advising member states that if they are opting for this type of energy, there would be some initial guidelines. I'm saying initial because apparently the guidelines would not be binding, but there would be initial guidelines as to how that member state should operate. And I think it also includes some minimum principles for fracking as well. What I can say is that it is best to await to see how the member states are implementing these initiatives, and then possibly knowing what the outcome would be to decide on a way forward.
Grazie. E adesso la parola.
Thank you. And now Mr. Gebrandi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Vella, the past 5 years have shown that the portfolio of the Environment Commissioner is a fighting portfolio. Economic growth and the creation of jobs in Europe is impossible without sustainability as a cornerstone of that same growth agenda. Nevertheless, both the political guidelines and especially your mission letter show us that sustainability is seen by President Juncker as slowing down economic growth. Do you agree with me that sustainability is a prerequisite for economic growth? And do you share my analysis that this is not reflected in the political guidelines nor the mission letters? In its reply to the Environment Committee's letter sent last week, President Juncker responds today that sustainability is so self-evident that it's not even necessary to mention it. History shows that that is intellectually right, but politically naive. How are you going to assure that sustainability will be a cornerstone of the Juncker growth agenda?
Thank you very much, Jan. But however, I would like to point out to the mandate letter that I was given by President-elect Mr. Juncker, and I will just read out one sentence from a whole paragraph of my mandate. That my mandate is also to ensure the sustainability of our environment, the preservation of our natural resources, and the conservation of our maritime biological resources. And these are the key policy objectives requiring action at all levels. I totally agree with you, Jan, that we cannot talk about economy, as I said earlier on, without sustainability. But I would differ a little bit from what you said, because sustainability today is not seen as something hindering economy, but it is sustainability, it is the environment which should be pushing future development, future sustainable development. For me, the environment could be looked at as an end in itself, or it could be looked at as a means to an end. I think we should look at the environment at both. Environment is an end in itself because we need clean air, clean waters, forestry, whatever. That's achieving environment as an end. Environment could also be seen as a means to an end because it can help Europe in our future growth. And I do believe that the mandate for growth and jobs using policies for blue growth and green growth are exactly this. As I said, we will be guided by the 7th EAP, which is totally, the 7th EAP will be our guiding framework, which is totally dependent on future sustainability.
Grazie. E adesso la parola.
Thank you very much. And I'll give the floor to Mr. Konechner. Mrs. Konechner.
Thank you. You are speaking about the package for clean air, but it's not very specific. You say that the whole agenda will have to be further analyzed. So when we see problems with applying standards in border areas, in cases when there are one country has exception and the other one doesn't, it's a problem because, of course, that pollution respects no borders. So one country can have very strict limit and invest a lot of funds, and it won't help us. The last Commission hasn't helped us a lot. It is a big cross-border problem, and I want you to tell us how citizens of responsible member states will be protected against pollution from those states that do not respect.
Yes, I take your point, which is a very important point, I think. You mentioned that there might be some member states which probably do not have enough finance and so on to safeguard and protect their citizens from environmental negative impacts. And I tend to agree with you, and I acknowledge your concerns that there is a different potential between member states. Not all the member states can safeguard to the same extent the environment for their citizens. But I think that we cannot compromise when it comes to standards. We have to keep the same standards for all the member states. We have to guarantee the same level of protection to all the citizens all over Europe, and we have to have a level playing field as well when it comes to European standards. But, as you mentioned, there might and there are structural funds which could be provided, and the member states which would require the more assistance, I think, should be supported. I do believe that if member states cannot cope with the standards that the European Union is legislating or is giving as directives, there are two ways to go about it. Either to not only control, but either to shame them or to help them. I think that the first approach should be to support these member states, to support not only financially, but also through roadmaps that the Commission is doing with a number of member states when it comes to the environment. Then, if nothing works, then we have to shame them and definitely take infringement action as well.
Grazie, adesso la parola.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Eickhout.
You know, there are very grave concerns about the structure of the new Commission and how Mr. Juncker is more or less downgrading environmental concerns, or at least make it a kind of a key priority of deregulation. In your answer you say, and you stress the importance of sustainability, but I would like to hear a bit more concrete answers, so I give you two concrete questions, and I do expect concrete answers on it. First, if there is an opposite opinion between envy and fisheries, for example, the listing of the bluefin tuna on Appendix 1 of CITES, how are you going to prioritize? Second question, the 7th EAP is more than a relevant framework, as you mentioned in your answers. It is giving us guidelines on what kind of legislative proposals will come forward. We know there are some issues ready to go, and I would like to hear from you, what are you going to do in the next 6 months on the proposals on access to justice, legislative proposal on environmental inspection, the strategy on endocrine disruptors, and the communication on sustainable food?
That's a very tall order. But I'll try. First of all, let's start with the sustainability. I do not agree that the Juncker administration has devalued or in any way downgraded the environment. I do not agree with that. As I said, the environment, sustainability, and so on, and the economy go hand in hand. I think you mentioned how I would react to the if the environment and the fisheries have a problem about the bluefish tuna. I think the decision about the quotas for bluefish tuna is never taken as a political decision, but any decision about quota is always taken after getting the best available scientific advice. So there is no room for maneuvering by the Commission. You mentioned a number of other directives, access to justice and so on. I think that a lot of work had already been done by the services on that. I will have to look into it, because I do not think that I am enough informed about it. You also mentioned about the endocrine biocides and so on. That has been now passed over to the Commissioner for Health. It doesn't mean that it does not, it is not of interest to us. Obviously, it is of interest to us. And the last point was access to justice was one of them, endocrine. What was the last point, if I may ask?
Environmental inspections and the strategy of sustainable food.
I think those proposals are still, it is still possible to revive those proposals, but I have to discuss with my services to see the way forward on them.
Adesso la parola al...
Now the floor goes to colleague Petticini for his question. Thank you, Mr. Petticini, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman. May I begin? I'm right here. May I begin? Thank you very much, Mr. Vella. We've paid much attention to Mr. Juncker's mission statement, particularly the description of the portfolio for environment and maritime affairs. Now, the issue of sustainability, protecting biodiversity, protecting the environment overall, all of these questions, these issues are present in the 2014 statement. And, of course, the directive on the protection of waters for the sustainable use of lands and the protection of oceans, seas, and reserves. Now, with this wonderful program, looking at the various aspects, particularly as concerns the protection of waters in Croatia and Italy, what we notice there is a terrible pollution, which has been caused by heavy metals and other sorts of effluents. Now, what is the countries which are already in a state of infringement have violated the various directives? What is the difference between them and the other countries? How is this to be implemented, in other words?
I take note, and I think during our meeting this issue has already been done by our colleague Pedicini. I think when we're talking about oil extraction and its effects, I think we have to consider two things. First, there is the economic issue, and there is the environmental issue. The decision on the economic issue, whether to authorize oil extraction or not, again, as I mentioned earlier on, lies with the member states. I know there is a lot of economic debate going on at the moment, with the European Union wanting to go for energy, more energy dependency, with the European Union wanting to move towards cleaner energy, with the European Union discussing energy efficiency and so on. So those are all economic arguments which have to be taken, and obviously will have to be taken by the member state. The role of the Commission is to see that if that member state, when exercising the authorization to extract oil, is not doing it in a manner which is consonant with the protection and environmental directives, then the Commission will obviously intervene. I take it that before such authorizations are given, there are various environmental impact assessments that should be done, and that should be done in a serious manner as well. So the important thing is that if a member state continue with its decision to go for oil extraction, then it has to abide by all the environmental rules. And if it doesn't, the Commission is there to take all the necessary action.
Grazie. Adesso la...
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to Madame Grostet for her question. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vella. At the outset, you talked about the circular economy and sustainability of resources. So whilst we're on that topic, the European Commission indeed considers that the movement towards a circular economy is the central plank of efficient use of resources as set out in the 2020 strategy. There are going to be legislative proposals which will deal with the Framework Directive on Waste, the Directive on Environmental Liability, and on waste and waste packaging. So there are going to be legislative proposals passed on to both the Council and the Parliament. But here there is a problem. Public policy normally needs to be based on scientific knowledge, reliable knowledge. But when it comes to waste management, the methodology and the statistical approach are too disparate and not reliable enough, so we cannot have a genuine comparison between member states. Do you think then that it is a priority to harmonise the measure in which we gauge the performance of different member states in terms of waste management before we start introducing new policies?
Yes, with regards to circular economy, I think I would agree, and I agree about the importance and the positive aspects of the circular economy. Why? Because it is in agreement, in consonant with our guiding directive, as we said earlier on, that it has a resource efficiency approach. You mentioned the waste, recycle and waste packages, which I think they have already been tabled, and the information that I have is that before being tabled, these proposals went through a very accurate, scientific and a cost-benefit analysis as well. When it comes to harmonizing all the standards across all the member states, I think, and I repeat what I said earlier on, that we cannot compromise on standards. We cannot have different standards for different member states. If I am not mistaken, the proposal, the waste recycle proposal, is awaiting the reactions from Parliament and Council. I think that my assessment would have to be after we get the reactions from Parliament and the Council. But yes, I agree with you that when it comes to the waste package, I think it is one of the best ways forward how we can make more use of our resources. The idea now is not only to have sustainable production, but also to have sustainable consumption. And this is where the waste package directives come in, not only addressing waste at production, but also addressing waste at consumption.
Grazie. Adesso la...
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to colleague Melior.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Designate Vella, there's the 2014-2020 environmental action programmes. You mentioned this before, and it sets out the priorities of EU environmental policies for the next 6 years. And this environmental action programme is very important for us as well in the ECR. So how are you going to ensure that the implementation of this programme has some sort of reflection in the European semester, so that the member states actually are bound more than they used to be to this? Thank you very much.
Yes, with regards to the 7th EAP, as I said, it is a mandate. It's a mandate because this EAP, 7th EAP, has already been co-decided by both the European Parliament and the Council, and I find this as very convenient for me because having adopted this as my guiding principles, having adopted something which has already been co-decided and co-legislated by the European Parliament and the Council, that means that we have something very much in common that we can start working on. With regards to ensuring that the policies, environmental policies, are mainstreamed into the other areas by where the responsibility lies with other commissioners. And the idea that we should also ensure the greening of the semester, I think that is the only way forward. We need to make certain that environmental policies are engulfed and streamed, integrated with any economic policy. If we are, as we said already earlier on, if we are going to look at a sustainable future, we cannot have the economy going north and the environment going south. And that is where we need more integration and we need more mainstreaming. And I think that was one of the reasons why President-elect Juncker is always talking about the idea of moving away from the silos mentality. Everyone benefits from the environment, so the environment should be everyone's responsibility as well.
Grazie.
Thank you. Now the floor goes to colleague Demesmaker.
Dank u wel, meneer Vella.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vella. The challenge is there in the Biodiversity Summit. And I'd like to pick up on what's been said about joining the Birds and Habitats directives. And I'm suspicious as well, I have to say. I know that this is very controversial in your own country, and there have been lively discussions on that. But you haven't answered a question. Well, you've made an attempt, but I still was left wanting more, is how this modernisation will pan out. Can you convince me of your ambitions? Another question on biodiversity. One of the most urgent issues is the problems of bees dying out. We have made sure that there's a temporary ban on neonicotinoids, but do you think that bee mortality is a massive challenge or not? And which measures are you intending to take?
With regards to the bird directive, I will repeat again that if we agree to review them, obviously there is no idea to deregulate or to demote them. We are not revising, but we are only reviewing. But again, we will have time to discuss this in more detail. With regards to the pesticides used which are killing the bees, I think, yes, that is also a very important issue, not only environmentally, but as you mentioned, with regards to biodiversity. I am aware and I totally share your concern, because the bees obviously are not only protecting the biodiversity, but they are protecting our food as well. And it is in the interest of my portfolio, again from the biodiversity side, although it is not the responsibility of my portfolio when it comes to the pesticides side. But I can confirm that I can work on this with my colleague, the Commissioner for Health. But when it comes to the bees, I think we have to play a more important monitoring role, because the problem with regards to the bees is not coming only from the chemical side. There are other issues which are harming the bees. There are agricultural issues, mainly because many member states or many farmers in many member states are opting to go for a monoculture when it comes to crops. Obviously, they have economic reasons if they think that cereals are selling at a higher price than whatever, but I think that it is in our interest to look at the environmental interests as well. And I know that from the Commission, the services have made a number of suggestions about this. They are encouraging more the idea of mixed crops rather than But I think this is a very important question and merits a lot of attention. I'm not saying this simply to have said something, but I promise that if need be, we can continue discussing this even further. Obviously, if I am confirmed, we can even meet and discuss this in more detail if you would like to.
Grazie, adesso la parola al...
Thank you. The floor now goes to colleague Javor.
Mr. Vella, the structural problem of merging the environmental and fisheries portfolio was already mentioned, but there is another structural problem in the new Commission. President-elect Juncker will only place new initiative on the agenda of the College if it's recommended by one of the Vice Presidents. Mr. Vella, according to your mandate for all your initiatives in the field of environment and fisheries, you depend on Mr. Katainen, the Vice President for Jobs and Growth. However, there is no reference whatsoever to environment protection or sustainable development in the mandate of Mr. Katainen. So my question is, how will you deliver the treaty obligation to ensure sustainable development, high level of protection and improvement of the quality of environment, given that you depend on a Vice President who is structurally blind in that regard? Sustainability is not even mentioned in his mission letter.
I know that this was a concern, and it has been, I think, discussed and debated and mentioned in every meeting that I had with a number of MEPs. But I do not think that it is that alarming in the sense that the principle of sustainability, the principle of sustainable development lies also in the treaty. So actually, if President-elect Juncker were to mention sustainability to just one commissioner, I don't know, that might be interpreted that specifically it is that commissioner which is being entrusted with the responsibility of sustainability, whereas according to the treaty, and all the commissioners will have to vow and they take oath that we have to defend the treaty, all of us, each and every one of us, is responsible towards sustainability, towards sustainable development. And the way that we will be working with the various vice presidents, obviously the vice presidents will be there to coordinate more than anything else. I'm not saying that they will not have a say in whatever projects we are implementing, but I think it's remote, very remote, for me to understand how any commissioner does not have the value, the principle of sustainability not in mind, in heart, when the first priority of every commissioner is to defend the treaty. And sustainable development is entrenched in the treaty. So I'm not saying that President Juncker did the right thing or President Juncker did the wrong thing, but certainly President Juncker, even when he gave me, and I can refer to it again, a whole paragraph, the mandate that I was given is specifically on sustainability and sustainable growth.
Grazie. E adesso...
Thank you. Now the floor goes to colleague Affronte.
Thank you. Mr. Vella, I'm sure you're aware of the biological role of sharks in marine ecosystems. In recent years, Europe has made some steps forward when it comes to banning finning of sharks and protecting sharks, but we still see a large number of sharks being landed in our ports, in our European ports, and there's no stock assessment. There are no measures which will ensure the sustainability of shark fishing. I'm thinking about the blue shark, magma, many other species. So what measures, what precautionary measures, what initiatives are you going to take in order to ensure that shark fishing respects the principle of sustainability and also respects the environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And as we all know, sharks is one of the species that we have to certainly have to look after. And I think that one of the best tools for us to use to look after these endemic species is the recently reformed common fisheries policy. Why am I saying that? Because some of its measures will help to reduce the catch of sharks as well. And I am specifically now talking to the landing obligation, whereas before there was the discards were allowed at sea. We couldn't even tell how many sharks were being caught without us even knowing. So at least, and when I mentioned that we have to implement the CFP as was agreed, and when I mentioned that one of the measures that is in the CFP, which we have to start implementing, is the discard ban, I think that will help us to eradicate the unwanted catch even of sharks. Let us not forget that when fishermen will have to land their catch now, they will hopefully, and I'm sure they will go for better selectivity. Meaning that whilst fishing, they will not, I'm not saying that fishermen do that, but whilst fishing, they will not simply not care about the fish and the unwanted fish that they catch, because they will simply discard them on seas. But now that there is the landing obligation, at least we will know and we can control better the catch of endemic species like sharks and other endemic species as well.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Balz has the floor. Mr. Balso.
But my flight was late, 1 hour, and it would be very impolite to ask to speak without hearing the commissioner designates. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Adesso...
Thank you very much. And now I'll give the floor to Caroline Florence.
Yeah.
Karl-Heinz Florence.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I have to put a question that unfortunately many other people have already put, and it's a question of implementation. Now, I've been in this Parliament for quite a while now, and every commissioner has disappointed me because the implementation of European law is just not working. I'm not going to even mention your country or Italy, I could even take my country, but the implementation of European law is a disaster. You've been a minister. You know how things work. It comes down to the European legislative texts. Every colleague here has a very important question or two to put, and I have that as well. But this is really the most important thing. If we want to have any credence in the population, if we want to implement what we decide on together, then Europe's future is not looking rosy. Secondly, on the circular economy, 200,000 people are born every day in this country, in this world, and that makes up over a year the whole population of Germany. I think that's something we should bear in mind. And I think the circular economy in Europe, if it's to work, it has to be supported wholeheartedly. You have to make a priority of that, and you have to make it clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I cannot agree more with what you said when it comes to implementation. And I think implementation is the key challenge in the European Union. And I think it is useless to carry on coming in with legislation and more legislation unless we start implementing. At times, it's better to see how we can implement existing legislation before coming in with additional legislation. And this is exactly one of the priorities which is set up in the 7th EAP. Apart from the 3 objectives, there are 4 enablers: the investment, implementation, information, and integration. And I think we have to look more at the implementation. Unfortunately, there are a number of member states who are possibly less responsible than others. And I think I want to use your question to take a little bit, to take an opportunity. I downloaded the infringements in 2013 when it comes to environmental infringement, member state by member state. The total infringement number is some 350, 353 to be exact. And there are some countries with 29 infringements on environment only, 25, 20, 19, 17. And here I would want to point out that the country I know best, for which the perception is that we are not compliant when it comes to the environment, the country I know best is one with the lowest, amongst the lowest for infringement. The country I know best has got 5 infringements along with 2 or 3 others compared to the 29s and the 25s and the 19s of other countries. I am saying this first to confirm what you are saying, that unless we implement and unless we stay to the rules that we set, it's useless to set rules unless we are prepared to implement them.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. And now, Mrs. Gutterland.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Vella, I'm over here. Hello. Yes, you mentioned REACH by way of introduction, which I think is very good, but one of the biggest challenges for environmental policy in the future is to counteract these dangerous chemicals, but also deal with endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors in people and animals are on the up, and we see a very clear link with an exposure to endocrine disruptors, and that can lead to serious things like cancer, but also problems with reproduction. So the first part of my question is, how do you intend to deal with this, to protect the environment, to protect human health? There was a proposal for criteria on what endocrine disruptors were, and this came out from the Commission services a week ago, and I'm wondering if you can promise a date on when we will see that proposal. Also, the question of bees has also been mentioned during this hearing, which I think is a good thing. It's a good idea that many of us here want to see serious policies in this area. Bee colonies are affected seriously throughout Europe, and we can see that it's down to a cocktail effect of chemicals, of the colleague's microphone's been cut off.
Tempo è finito.
Sorry, your speaking time's run out.
Vad avser du göra?
What do you intend to do? Because I thought it was a bit weak.
Again, with regards to the bees, I think the question has already been raised, and as I said, there is a lot of concern, and the Commission has already proposed some other ways how the eradication of bees could be evaded. When it comes to endocrine disruptors, I think Jan mentioned them, and biocides and so on. Obviously, these are related more to health. Previously, they were the responsibility of REACH, which, by the way, I think is doing, there's a good progress. The fact that substances have to be registered, evaluated, authorized, I'm referring to chemical substances, the objective of which is to eliminate, identify, and eliminate dangerous chemical substances. At the moment, I was told that there are some 12,000 dossiers with REACH, most substances that are being used in our industry. Out of these 12,000 substances, some 1,000 were identified to be analyzed and so on. And all this is being done by ECMA, which is in Helsinki, which is doing a very good job. coming back to the endocrine, I think I will repeat again that from a health point of view, these are very much of concern to us, to my portfolio, but these have been referred to the Commission for Health. And there I think I can easily say that I will work hand in hand with Commissioner Vitenis, because after all, health is one of our priorities as well. Eliminating environmental risks to health is one of the objectives as well in the 7th EAP. So I cannot make an individual commitment on this. What I can commit myself to do is to work closer with the Commissioner for Health on this.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Dorfman has the floor.
I'll speak in Danish. Deres forgænger, Jannik Pronik, har fremsat et forslag til en ny luft.
Mr. Potočnik tabled a proposal for a new air quality package which includes targets for ammonia emission reductions in 2020 and 2030. And we have in 2020
Può cominciare nuovamente la domanda?
Could you start your question again?
That's okay. Should I start now? Okay. Deres forgænger, Jannik Pronik, har fremsat et forslag.
Your predecessor, Janis Potočnik, tabled a proposal for a new air quality package which includes targets for ammonia emissions reductions in 2020 and 2030. In 2020, the EU ammonia reduction target is only 6% compared to 2005. Today, reductions in the order of 5.7% have already been achieved. However, whilst the environmental benefits are very modest, some countries are set to reduce ammonia emissions by 4 times the EU average. In Denmark, which is assigned a 24% reduction target by 2020, it is estimated that such a policy will lead to the loss of 11,000 jobs and, of course, a loss of agricultural exports worth 1 billion euros. So what is your view on the very high discrepancy in burden sharing amongst member states on this particular file? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think when you spoke about the air quality package as proposed by Potočnik, and I think I have to take the opportunity to wish and to praise the work that Janis has been doing over the last years. I met him and it was one of my most interesting meetings that I had. With regards to the air quality, it is still a very big problem. It has got very negative effects, both socially, environmentally, and also as economically. And I think we have to act very fast on this. The cost impacts of the bad air quality, especially not only on health, but also on absenteeism at work. So it's also having an economic impact as well. The sources, I know that services have been doing a wonderful job at identifying the sources, whether they be from transport, agri, industry. I know that there were some very serious proposals as well. I know that a lot of monitoring and control is being done when it comes to national emission ceilings. And I also know that the number of members of parliament that raised this issue during our meetings is a very good indication of the seriousness of this. And exactly because of how serious this issue is, I told each and every one member of parliament that this will be one of the first priorities. I have already alerted services that if I am confirmed, this is one of the first things that we have to go through together. Also, we have to see whether the measures, on the other hand, are going to have a negative economic effect, such as the ones you mentioned.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Faria has the floor.
Mr. Vella, under its blue growth agenda, the Commission intends to support seabed and deep sea mining. Yet there are large uncertainties regarding the environmental impacts of such activities. This regards the geomorphology of the seabed, its ecosystems, and in turn how this will impact for more general marine ecosystems. What do you think should be done, or should be the role of the Commission in pushing forward an adequate legal framework for the environmental protection of international waters and marine protected waters in respect of seabed mining? Do you plan to put forward proposals for a better management of marine protected areas? Thank you.
I think that the idea to have marine protected areas is already there, and it is a sort of an extension to the Natura 2000. I believe it is very, very important to have these kind of initiatives, because when we talk about the sustainability of our fishes, of our waters, and so on, at times we tend to take it for granted that limiting fishing to a maximum sustainable yield is going to solve everything. There are other things which are harming the fishes and the fish stocks in our seas, and we have to take care of that as well. We cannot expect that the measures are only given to the fishermen and we don't take any measures against the other factors which are polluting our seas and which are causing the diminishing of our stocks, like pollution in our oceans and deep sea mining as well. So yes, I think that something will have to be done. I need, as I said, I need to also get acquainted more, because this is not something, it's really something which needs a lot of thinking, needs a lot of discussing, is going to affect a number of member states, it's going to affect a number of member states, not only environmentally but also economically, but I think the environmental interest should always be kept at the forefront of these discussions, especially when we're talking about areas where we do not have any experience at all, areas where we do not have any formal experience, so that we have to move into these areas with the precautionary method as well. So we have to be careful, we have to discuss, and we have to examine and analyze what is on the table as well.
Grazie. E adesso...
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Turmes has the floor for his question.
Thank you, President. Commissioner candidate, I have heard that you are under instructions from the President-elect not to commit to any new initiatives, and worse, not that you were even told not to commit to maintaining existing legislation. And as Greens, but I think much larger, in this room, the members of Parliament who fight for environment, come on, if you have an attitude just to follow what some pro-business commissioners will tell you, we will go nowhere. We need somebody who fights for us and who stands up to fight. And we need somebody who is concrete and somebody who commits also here to concrete legislation. So inspections, access to justice, air pollution. Where will we go? Because otherwise, how can we have any insurance that you are the right person to do this job? Thank you very much.
To be honest, if I don't give any commitment today, it is not because I have been given any instructions to do so. I cannot pretend to come here, I cannot pretend to know everything, and I cannot pretend that I can start giving commitments left, right, and center unless I am 100% certain that the commitments I give in here, I will be able to deliver tomorrow. So I do not have such a commitment, but I do not have such instructions, but I will not give any commitment, and I am sure, Claude, that you will understand this, especially knowing that it is a new commission. We have to take stock of what was left, even in terms of legislation, and taking stock. I think
in his address to the European Parliament in July, will be dedicated to projects related to energy efficiency and green jobs. Could you define your EU strategy for promoting a more efficient use of the available funding, for example, structural funds, as well as envisaging innovative ways of financing in the future, for example, the European Investment Bank, in order to boost investments in the green economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Childers. As you said, one of the commitments that have been given by President-elect Juncker is the 300 billion euro package. And the objective of this 300 billion euro package is towards jobs, growth, investment, and so on and so forth. The 300 billion euros obviously will be something which could be got from the EU budget, the European Investment Bank, plus any other investment coming from the private sector as well. And I attach a lot of importance to this last factor, which is the private sector. Why? Because no matter how much we talk about growth, no matter how much we talk about jobs, in my opinion, no government on its own can come up with incremental number of jobs, with, going for economic growth, unless the private sector is also involved. And I think that the future role of many of the governments in many member states will have to be a supporting role, a facilitating role, rather than simply a regulating role, rather than having a regulatory. And I think that one of the ways how we can entice the private sector to contribute towards this growth is by making available the amount of finance which is already mentioned. However, I must say now that since this finance is coming out of the European Union, there is no harm in tying in with it certain environmental rules and regulations. If we're going to make available more finance, I think it is only fair that if we are talking about a future sustainable economy, then we will not simply give finance for the growth of the economy, but we will give finance for the growth of sustainable economy.
Grazie. Adesso.
Thank you. Now the floor to colleague Pieka.
There are opportunities to improve the quality of effectiveness of European legislation, whilst still protecting the environment. What will you do to ensure a rigorous approach to carrying forward the Commission REFIT programme on environmental dossier? Will you look for opportunities to improve the quality and coherence of the EU environmental acquis, taking account of the outcomes of work undertaken by Member States? Will you take into account of the core principles of subsidiarity and proportionality and attempt to avoid unnecessary burden on business, particularly SMEs business? Thank you.
Yes, I do take your point. There is, as you mentioned already, the REFIT agenda, which is not something which is going to be introduced now, but it has already been introduced. The REFIT is a fitness check and not a deregulation exercise. I don't think that the intention of the REFIT is to deregulate, but it is to see how we can make the legislation, even the existing legislation, more efficient and also perhaps more coherent. It is important to say, and it is important to stress, that in the REFIT agenda, the objectives of legislation being considered and the objectives of the legislation being assessed, the objectives must remain there. It is not the idea of having a refit agenda to change the objectives. And I think that the study of this refit agenda, the outcomes and the evaluation is already, there's already a lot of it being done in the process, in the pipeline, and I think it is only for me wise to say that we have to wait for the conclusions after this fitness check is done. The options will be open. There might be a number of options, but the options will be decided upon when we have more information from the outcome of the fitness checks on most of the legislation which is being undertaken and which is already in the pipeline.
Grazie. Adesso la parola.
Thank you. The floor now goes to colleague Gambus.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Vella. As you mentioned in your initial statement, in your remit, you will be responsible for growth and maritime policy, an integrated maritime policy, and the preservation, of course, of maritime environments as well within this particular sphere. Of course, in Catalonia, we're very, very conscious of this particular issue as we're on the Mediterranean, and we are also aware of the fact that research and innovation will provide added value and will provide an opportunity to develop on numerous different fronts. So what do you plan as far as developing research, innovation, as one of the most important possibilities for responding to the various issues that have emerged, particularly as concerns the maritime environment, protection of the maritime environment, and so forth? Thank you very much.
Yes, I think that when we talk about the blue economy, we cannot simply talk about the blue economy in isolation without also talking about the need to give more protection, if need be, to our seas and to our oceans. After all, if we're planning for any kind of economy, whether it be blue economy, green economy, the only way forward to have that economy last longer is to do it sustainably. And this is where the marine and maritime protection needs will come in handy. You spoke about research, and I think research will have to be one of the priorities about our marine protection and about our maritime organization of all the activities that go around together. Why am I saying this? Because we have spent a lot of money. We are spending hundreds of millions and billions in trying to discover what's there in outer space and so on. And I hope we do get something out of it, but if we will get something, it's going to be not long term, but long term. And then perhaps we're not giving enough attention to the opportunities and the potential that we have in our seas and in our oceans, provided that anything we're going to consider will be considered in a sustainable way. And if we're going to touch our seas and if we're going to touch our oceans, we need to know more about them. If we go into no man's land and if we go without any research data, without any scientific data, that is the worst thing that we can do. Research, innovation, scientific advice, and so on are imperative before we even start thinking about touching our oceans and our seas.
Grazie. E adesso.
Thank you very much. And here we close with the last question in section dedicated to the environment. And we will begin now with the fishery speaking order. But first of all, we have the last question, that of Mr. Nicola Caputo.
Grazie, Mr.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Vella. I'd like to come back to this circular economy issue. And the EU's got certain ambitious objectives here. To achieve these, we need to change our lifestyles, and that we'll need to bring about structural changes. So I'd like to ask you, what instruments do you intend to use in order to encourage investments in the sector, in the private sector, in order to develop better opportunities at the production and at the consumption stage? And finally, given the crucial role that the member states will have to play in order to get to use European funds in a smart way, what measures will you set in place to encourage member states in this direction, and what measures are you going to propose to promote investment in new technologies for integral management of waste? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caputo. I think that what we can give to the private sector to incentivize the private sector to participate more in any economic activity that we are promoting, I think what the private sector wants to have is the tranquility that rules are not always changing. So the private sector wants more stability, not changing the rules, not changing regulations, and so on. Secondly, I think that if we are moving into new areas of the economy, if we're going for blue growth, if we're going for, I think the private sector would want to have available a pool of already skilled labor force in that sector. The private sector would also want to have availability and access to finance. Most of the finance which is available is only tied maybe to traditional economy. As soon as someone comes up with an innovative idea, as soon as someone comes up with a new, perhaps, economic venue which was not present before, finance available gets more and more limited. So I think in that area, by giving the private sector, available to finance, adequate labor skills, use of funds to help him in marketing his product, and the best help that we can give him is to direct him towards a circular economy, because we are saying that the future that we want is sustainable economy, meaning that if we direct, the more private sector we direct into the circular economy, the more guarantee we're going to give him that his enterprise will be long and long term.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Well, now we're going to move on to questions concerning the Fisheries and Maritime Affairs Committee. Thank you, Giovanni, for chairing that bit. And without further ado, Mr. Mato Adrover.
Comisario, ha hablado mucho de medio.
You talk a lot about the environment. Now, Commissioner, let's start talking about fisheries. And I would like to hear from you your commitment to the fishing sector as a whole, and your commitment to the fishing industry. We haven't heard anything about that yet. And your commitment to sustainability in the broadest sense of the term, beyond the environment. So we've got the new fisheries common market, the fisheries policy. What are you going to do when it comes to setting new tax and new quotas as of 2015 within these? And what are you going to do about the new discard policy? And you've asked this question about bluefin tuna. You said that this is not a political issue, and you said there hasn't had much of an impact on fishing labour, but I'd like to know fishing workers. But I'd like to know whether the scientists are putting forward the idea of do you think there's a scientific basis for increasing the quotas for bluefin fishing? And what about the IUU fishing? What are you going to do about that? I'd like to know what the Commission's position is going to in order to try to fight, get the 28 to fight together in fighting illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mato, I think with regards to IUU, it is already spelled out in the CFP that we have to go all out against IUU. Why? Because it is not fair that we put conditions on our fishermen so that our stock does not diminish, and then we let IUU continue, and continue and grow. So I agree with you. We have to tackle this ASAP. And there are ways how the Commission is proposing to be tackling this IUU, especially with regards to the new measures that if fisheries are sending their exports to the European Union, if the Commission has evidence that that was caught unregulated, obviously there will be trade measures implemented against that IUU product. When it comes to, you mentioned bluefin tuna, yes, this is something which is of big importance to all the fishermen, especially to fishermen in the Mediterranean and Atlantic and so on, because this is a highly migrating. And I know that there will be a meeting in Genova, if I'm not mistaken, in November, and most of the fishermen are waiting, and they are indicating that they would expect some kind of quota increase. The indications, and as of today, we cannot speak of any facts because scientific evidence is not yet available, but the fishermen are contending that there are indications of improvement, but we cannot simply work on quotas with indications. We can only work on quotas, and ICAT can only work on quotas with hard scientific evidence. I think it is good to note if there is improvement, that the measures which have been carried out in the past at least are giving good results.
Avant de passer la parole,
before giving the floor to my colleague Rodust, we are in a hearing for a commissioner designate. Those of you who want to leave, please leave. If you want to stay, then stay and listen. Mrs. Rodust.
Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Here I am, Mr. Vella. Fishermen in Europe are extremely frustrated, and they're worried about the landing obligation and how that's going to affect their profession. There's not a great deal of information available about the technical and legislative aspects of how this is to be implemented. What about you, Mr. Vella? How are you going to make sure that the landing obligation doesn't lead to a lot of red tape, a lot of rules that will be difficult to wade through? And in this context, I would also like to put to you, what will you do to make sure that we can speed up the implementation of multi-annual plans in the North and Baltic Seas? I'm saying that because if we can't get the support of the fishermen from the start, we're not going to be able to implement the reform of the fisheries policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rodust. Starting with the landing obligation, I think this is a key element of the reform, and the fact that we are ending discard bans sets the mind of many citizens at least at rest. However, it's a challenge. I wouldn't say it's a problem, but it's a challenge to most of the fishermen. I must say that it is ambitious, but I must also say that it is possible. And you mentioned the multi-annual plans in the Baltic. Even with regards to the discards, the experience shown so far shows that there were positive results and a positive feedback in the Baltic area. I can share the concerns of many fishermen, because obviously they would not want to have unnecessary burdens added to probably their already existing ones. And I think one of the best tools that we have to implement the landing obligation is to go through regionalization. I think regionalization is one of the feathers in the cap of the reform. I know that you were heavily involved in it with Marto and Isabel and so on. So I think it was, in my opinion, a very good exercise that left a good number of results. And I think that going through regionalization would give the fishermen the opportunity to be actors in how they are going to implement the landing obligation as well, because they would be going through their RACs as well, the regional advisory councils as well. With regards to the Baltic, as I mentioned, I think there has been a good response already, and I know that the Baltic multi-annual plan will be, how do you say, adopted soon.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Grobarczyk.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I too would like to ask a question, although on a different area, but on the Baltic Sea as well. So, with reference to the Baltic Sea as well. For 7 years now, we had a long-term program for the cod, for the protection of cod. So there's been a cut in catches by 25% for the cod. So billions of euro have gone to waste without any results, because we still see the stocks shrinking. The fish's been slim because there's no food for it in the waters. There's been quota increased for other species, such as herring, for example, which is normally the food for the cod. So my question is this: for industrial fishing, will you be dealing with industrial fishing? Because it's been destroying the environment, and it is very harmful for Baltic as such, because Baltic Sea is different from other seas in that respect. Thank you.
Yes, I agree perfectly well with your last sentence, saying that the Baltic is totally different from the other seas. And coming from the Mediterranean, I can appreciate how different it is, because the problems which we have in the Mediterranean probably you wouldn't even dream of in the Baltic. But I agree there are a number of factors playing around. Fishermen want to catch more fish, other fish are eating more fish. So it's always a question of balance, but when you ask me what I can do about all this, to be honest, there is very little I myself as an individual can do, because anything that is to be done with regards to quotas and plans and so on will always have to be agreed upon, and decisions will always have to be taken after getting the best available scientific advice. If stocks are shrinking, I'm not saying that stocks are, as I said before, are shrinking only because the fishermen are catching more. There have been instances because of climate change, fish stocks tend to migrate through different areas. There have been instances where one particular stock grows at a faster rate than we think, and it also starts eating other fish stocks. So again, this is something that we have to look into. I'm not saying that things will change. Things will not change unless justified by scientific advice.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire. Je passe la...
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, Mr. Marinho e Pinto.
Mr. Vella. I'm here, Mr. Vella. I'm here. Thank you. What's the real influence of third countries like Norway when it comes to the definition of the European Union's fisheries policy? And what is your position on this subject? And what are you going to do as regards the multi-annual fishing programs for codfish and anchovies, and which are actually being sequestered, have been sequestered and seized for many years. And what are you going to do about the need for the long line fishermen in fresh waters? That involves about 20,000 people, and this involves about 8 to 10 million turnover. And what are you going to do about the whole question of fish consumption in European Union, where we're relying more and more on imports? Are you going to go back to promoting aquaculture, and how, and what sort of support will you give to aquaculture? Thank you very much.
Yes, with regards to Norway, I think that the Commission is on an annual basis not reaching agreements with Norway, but they are discussing how the quota between Norway and the European Union is shared. With regards to multi-annual plans, I think, yes, we need, because unless we have multi-annual plans in place, it's going to be difficult to implement the CFP. So multi-annual plans should be a priority on our agenda, and I think we have to step up the multi-annual plans as well. Even because now we've had the experience of the interinstitutional task force, which I think has done a wonderful job, and if need be, we can even learn from their experiences when we are preparing the multi-annual plans as well. Again, when it comes to multi-annual plans, we have to do them also through regionalization, because different seas have got different characteristics, and they have different conditions, and they have different fish stocks, and one might have a single stock, the other one might have a multi-fish stocks, and so on and so forth. But I agree with you that the multi-annual plans should be a priority. With regards to the regional approach, again, there are different ways how we can do them, because there are regions where we can only rely on the RACs, the regional advisory councils. There are other regions like the Mediterranean region where we have to go through either international or we have to go through RFMOs, the Regional Fishing Management Organization, especially in the Mediterranean, where we have the problems of a number of EU member states and a number of non-EU member states, and we have to see how we can convince them to work on the same regulation and legislation.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire. Je passe la parole.
Thank you, Commissioner. João Ferreira.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner, this Parliament approved in its last term of office a report on craft fishing, small-scale fishing in the context of the reform of the CFP. And in this report, there were various proposals on artisanal fishing concerning this particular sector of the fleet. Are you going to centralise this management of the fisheries? But is there going to be positive discrimination for artisanal small-scale fishing and measures to support them in emergency situations? Proposals for increasing their yield, their productivity. Are you aware of Parliament's report on artisanal fishing? And what proposals do you have for small-scale fishing sector, for this sector of the market? And when it comes to the written replies you gave, I must say that it wasn't very convincing when it comes to the whole question of decentralisation, regionalisation, especially when it comes to the implementation of technical measures. So what specific steps are you going to take in this area of decentralisation and regionalisation? Thank you.
Yes, I agree with our friend Joe Ferreira that SSF, the small-scale fish, will have to be taken very, very seriously. And I am saying this even from an environmental point of view, because they are the least environmental damaging of the industry. They generate a good number of jobs. Most of them are family-run businesses. And I know that there is already in place special arrangement, especially financial arrangements when it comes to financing and assistance from the new EMFF. I know that they could get a lot of help to market their products. They could get a lot of help also administratively to draw up business plans and so on. I know that there is also a number of SSFs who are opting to get some training and training-related funds. So yes, what the Commission needs to do now is to make certain that out of the funds which are being given from the EMFF to the Member States, a good chunk of those, a majority of those funds would be going also to the SSF. I know that they have a privileged access to finance, a higher and a more intensive availability of finance. I think that we should continue to encourage this sort of fishing, encourage in the sense that from my experience, I said I come from a small fishing village in the country I know best, and small fishing communities, two that I know of. One of them was given the opportunity that family-run fisheries would also be able to invest in their own restaurants. And others were introduced into other sectors like tourism, which help them as well.
Merci. Je passe la parole à Isabella.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Isabella Lövin.
Yes, 3 points. The Greens think that one of the Commissioner Damanakis' main achievements was to establish the fight against IUU fishing as a cornerstone of the CFP. And we shall be watching carefully to ensure that you continue her tough approach. And I'd like to hear if you will commit to allocate the sufficient personnel and other resources to continue this fight. Secondly, another accomplishment under Madame Damanaki and the European Parliament was to ensure that the objective of the CFP was to have abundant fish stocks above levels which can produce MSY in order to have healthy seas. So concerning fishing opportunities, will you commit to propose fishing quotas below FMSY so that we will have these abundant stocks? And thirdly, on the external dimension, which is now a former part of the CFP, including a requirement to limit EU catches in the Fisheries Partnership Agreement to a surplus as defined by the UN Law of the Seas, will you commit to respecting this requirement so that the EU does not exploit developing countries and compete with poor fishermen about the same fish stocks?
Yes, Isabel, and I get a chance to say a big thank you to Damanaki for her work as well. And with regards to IUU, I think, yes, we have to continue with the same aggression against IUU as before. And I think it is only fair to our fishermen that we protect them from this illegal activity as well. With regards to the CFP and MSY, and I know this is your pet subject and you have given a good contribution, the MSY approach to get replenishment of fish stocks, I think it is the top priority and the fulcrum on which the whole CFP, the whole CFP is built. And the challenge is not only to restore the fish stock, but to maintain it, to sustainably maintain it. So we have first to restore it and then to maintain it. And I know that you also often speak about above MSY levels and so on, and I think that is something which is envisaged, but in order to go for an above MSY, we have the challenge to at least reach the MSY level first. With regards to the external dimension and the sustainable fishing partnership agreements, yes, I think the three conditions that you mentioned. First, that agreement and EU registered vessels only fish for the surplus, that the third countries are not fishing. So that is always there in any SFPA. There are two other requirements that the Commission and the European Union is always insisting on, is that these countries with whom we are making the SFPAs stay away from labor, cheap labor, and also there is also the question of human laws, sustainability, and so on.
Je suis désolé, Monsieur Vella.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vella. And now, Mr. Finch has the floor.
Commissioner Vella, I want to ask you about a terrible example of bycatch. The bycatch are Britain's drift net fishermen who've always played by your rules and obeyed your laws. Your speech earlier said that those who play by the rules must not be punished. However, they're to suffer the most drastic possible punishment for the actions of others. Because of what happens in the Mediterranean and the failure of other nations and the EU to enforce your own laws, the EU now plans to ban all drift nets everywhere. Commissioner Vella, will you help me to stop this terrible injustice to law-abiding British fishermen who will lose their livelihoods for what is done in another sea, hundreds of miles away, in ecological terms a world away, but unfairly and unjustly treated by the EU as if it is all the same? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Finch. This is, again, the drift net is a total ban is at the moment one of the hottest issues and one which most of the people that I spoke to have shown a concern of. And most of the MEPs are showing their idea, they are commenting that a total ban is not the best solution to have. The results could be achieved, the same results they are insisting could be achieved through other measures. I know that the Commission proposal was a start of a legislative procedure. Possibly there will have to follow a transparent political debate now in Parliament, between Parliament and the Commission. And I think it is only fair that the Commission will take an overall stakeholders' view of this. Again, as I said, this is a very hot issue, and if I am confirmed by you, I will commit myself to continue listening carefully to all the concerns that you are showing. And I think that perhaps even in the discussions between and the assessments between the European Parliament and the Council, the Commission will be able to play a good coordinating and a facilitating part as well. If the European Parliament considers that in order to assess this proposal as a start of a legislative process, if the European view think that you should have more information or want to discuss even further, then I will certainly try and look into this very, very carefully. I will be open to explore all options as long as they are reasonable options in the interest of the Union, in the interest of the citizens, and in the interest of the sustainability of the fish stocks as well.
Merci. Je passe la parole.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Collin.
Oui, Monsieur le Commissaire désigné.
Commissioner, Mrs. Godin, Commissioner Designate, on the 30th of June last, your predecessor, Mrs. Damanaki, at the World Ocean Conference came out in favour of getting rid of tax exemption on fishing fuel to help fishermen and to call upon member states to get rid of all state aid to fleets. Now, the fishermen are very worried about those declarations because without with these exemptions, it would be practically all fishing companies that would have to just shut down, close up shop. So my question is the following. Are you going to follow the same line as Mrs. Damanaki? Are you in favour of getting rid of the tax exemptions for fishing fuel given to fishermen? Are you getting rid of all state aid to fishing fleets? Thank you. Are you in favour of that?
I honestly think that, I'm not certain, but probably tax exemptions and state aid and so on those will have to be considered at member state level. I do not have any background information on this. I will try and get some more information from my colleagues, but I will get back to you on this, and if need be, I can ask, if I'm confirmed, my personnel to get in touch with you, and maybe we can. But as far as I know, I do not think that tax exemptions and so on are something that the Commission can decide on. And even if it is up to the Member States to decide, I'm not sure we can have different playing fields for different fishermen within the same European Union. So if you have any information, or you have to help me in on this, and I will get some more assistant information from my services as well.
Merci. Je passe tout de suite la parole à...
Thank you very much. Our colleague, Mr. Wałęsa.
It's time for the implementation of the CFP reform. How will you influence the process of preparing the multi-species plan for the Baltic Sea to allow for the quick reaction, and this is the key formula, quick reaction to changing state of the fishing stocks covered? It is especially important given the current difficult situation of the both Baltic cod stocks, caused mostly by the flawed architecture of the currently applicable plan. My second question is, how do you intend to assure good economic conditions for fishing fleets, and especially the coastal fleets, given the necessity to implement certain environmental rules such as Natura 2000 or Maritime Strategy Framework Directive, which have the potential to significantly reduce the ability to conduct fisheries?
So, yes, with regards to the Baltic and so on, I think the only way forward to start implementing the CFP in the same terms as it was agreed is through, as we mentioned before, through the multi-annual plans. And yes, because the multi-annual plans would have started with the single species, and they will now start moving into the multi-stock as well. So this is where I think the scientific advice and the work of the advisory councils will have to come in. With regards to the economic conditions of the fishing fleets and the restrictions that, with regards to the Natura 2000 and so on, I think it's only fair to say that if we are taking environmental precautions, talking about restricted areas, fishing areas, Natura 2000, I think it is not only in the interest of the environment only, but indirectly it should be also in the interest of the fishermen as well. And in the same way that every time we embark on specific economic measures, in the same way that when we do economic measures, we have to keep in mind environmental issues as well. We have to do it the other way around as well. Whenever we embark on environmental measures, we have to keep in mind, as you said, the economic repercussions as well. In this case, the impacts, economic impacts, such decisions will be having on fishermen, especially if they are small coastal fishermen, if they are, as Joe Ferrero has said, the SSFs. So we do have to take a lot of care about them when we are taking environmental decisions as well.
Isabelle Thomas.
Isabelle Thomas.
Oui, bonjour, monsieur.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vella. For decades now, the Europeans have been drawing on fish resources, bringing into question the survival of certain species. We've seen an attempt to try and put a stop to this by introducing maximum sustainable yield. Nevertheless, half of the European fleet has been decimated, and the European Union imports 65% of the fish resources that it consumes. It's not easy balance to strike, and to find that kind of natural balance and maintain jobs as well, especially when we're talking about competitiveness. So how are we going to deal with our neighbours who are less stringent on sustainability? In the Mediterranean, that's the case, for example, but also in the Celtic Sea, where we have Iceland and Norway, who are very competitive, and also for the outlying regions as well, who have at one and the same time the most vulnerable ecosystems and also the most threatened fisheries. So it's a question of the neighbourhood of ultra-peripheral regions, which can be really down to the wire.
Yes, I share your concern here as well, especially when you mentioned our relationship with third countries and how we are going to convince them to fish in the same and under the same regulations that we do, that our EU-registered vessels do. And I think the Mediterranean is the area where we have most of these problems. The Mediterranean hasn't got only the problem of having a mixed stock. It's very difficult to work in the Mediterranean because of the other third countries. We try to go through the GFCM, but okay, it takes time. And I think the best way to deal with these third countries, as you mentioned, would be to, first of all, to dialogue with them. There is no other way unless we dialogue with them. The other way of doing it is that if we are having agreements with them, if we are helping them with finance, with plans and so on, then we make it imperative that they have to come on board on our restrictions as well. I think it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy because some of these countries with whom we have to discuss and dialogue, unfortunately, are going through some problems as well. So for most of them, it is not the right time that we sit down to discuss these issues. But these are certainly issues that we will have to consider. It is very frustrating when, I don't know, a fisherman in the Mediterranean tells you, listen, I have fish passing by, I cannot touch that fish because I have to abide by the EU rules and regulations, and as soon as that fish goes a further 50 meters, someone else gets it. So.
Je passe la parole immédiatement à notre collègue Niriada.
And now Mrs. Niriada.
The issues of the fisheries has always been a contentious one, and now times are particularly tough with shortages in the areas needed for scientific data collection, which, as you know, affects the ability to set accurate quotas. This has a knock-on effect and has a serious impact on an already tough livelihood for our fishermen. So can you tell me, how are you going to ensure that this is resolved and that it's not going to be a continuing situation year in, year out?
Yes, it is a concern, and I agree totally with you that data collection has certainly got to improve. And the only way that data collection can improve is that member states comply with it and improve their feedback. There is a scientific progress which totally depends on the data which is being collected, and unless that data is the right data, unless that data is the data which is collected in time, and so on, it's going to make things very difficult for the scientists, as you said, to give us their advice. The idea about data is to simplify, build on what is existing, but maybe simplify. There is a lot of data which is collected but is not being used, so if data is being collected and it is not being used, I think we should simplify on that and maybe introduce more important and more relative data. When we're talking about data, it is also important that we disseminate this data. This data is not something that should be held in a cupboard, but it should be disseminated even to member states who are really interested on it. And I think another way that we can improve on data collection is through the funds of the EMFF, the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, which has got a certain amount already allocated to the improvement of the data collection. As I said, a lot could be done through regionalization as well. I think many regions know their area much better than, I don't know, than other regions. So it is only fair to say, and I think it is only logical to say, that there should be like data collection points, regionalized data collection points, which can be more professional in the area that they are dealing with.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Finch has the floor again.
Thank you. Commissioner Vella, do you share my view that the EU is responsible for a new form of colonialism? I refer, of course, to fishing agreements with third world countries which hand money to elites whilst depriving local fishermen of the chance to earn a living. Will you stop the EU buying off the rich of poor countries so that they can plunder the waters of those countries, and ensuring that your ordinary folk have no way of making money and no means of subsistence, therefore being forced to either starve or indulge in illegal activities? Will you stop a system which even forces European taxpayers to subsidise such wicked colonial exploitation? Thank you.
I beg to differ a little bit on this, because I do not think the fact that the European Union is going into agreements to help EU fishermen is a sort of colonialism. Colonialism would have been if the European Union just went in, didn't pay anything, took over all the fisheries, but the European Union is paying, and it is paying high excess fees. Also, there is an act of support towards these third countries as well. I think FPAs are showing a good positive result, in the sense that even I think there was an increase in 2010-12, if I'm not mistaken, there were 9 agreements. Now, last year or this year, we had about 13. All the SFPAs are very transparent, and all the SFPAs are all regulated. They are respectful of the stocks that they are fishing, as even Isabella said, that if we are going to fish through these SFPAs, we can only fish on the extra bit, and I think that they are beneficial not only to the EU fleet, but they are also beneficial to the third countries with whom we are having these agreements. The important thing is that there is no competition with the locals, and as I said earlier on, there are some clauses which the Commission always insists on when dealing with these SFPAs, those conditions being obviously that there should be no lowering of labour standards, and that human rights in these third countries are observed.
Merci. Je passe tout de suite la...
Thank you very much. Mr. Milan Mon has the floor.
I too feel that these particular agreements with third countries are absolutely necessary. For example, the one with Mauritania. Very important for the Spanish fleet, of course, and for other fleets as well. And here we're speaking about the stocks of octopus and squid. But there has been a drop in the prices recently, and Mauritania has stopped all fishing until August. Also, there are Chinese vessels fishing for octopus in these waters. So undoubtedly, octopus has to be included within the new agreement and within the new legislation to be adopted. We've seen numerous different moves made by the Commission in the past in order to protect the environment, but on the other hand, we've had marginalization of certain key issues which involve protection of the environment as well. So some of the words that have been uttered today have been a source of hope. But I want to say that it's absolutely necessary to look at the various impact assessment studies that have been conducted in order to conduct and forge further legislation on these issues for protection. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And as I said before, I agree with you that these SFPAs are very important, and they are very important even for some member states, more perhaps than for others. But at the end of the day, we're all in the same, as we say, in the same water. So the agreement, there is an economic importance of the SFPAs. And with regards, you mentioned Mauritania as well, which is, I know it's very important for the fishing sector in your region. And what I know about Mauritania is that the negotiations are still ongoing. Not only with Mauritania, I think the Commission takes the approach that on each and every SFPA, the cost efficiency, the sustainability element is always there. The value for money that these third countries would be asking from the Commission has always a big role to play. So let's hope that with Mauritania an agreement could be reached, provided that obviously the cost efficiency and sustainability remains there. With regards to the cephalopods, I think, again, I refer to the scientific data. I think at the moment there is some scientific data indicating that cephalopods are overexploited. There might be, I don't know, other, but that is the information that I have. So we have to abide by these scientific advice. Even if we want to change anything, at least we have either to wait that the scientific advice changes first. But I think that the Commission should continue to work with Mauritania and to continue working at a scientific level as well to see.
Je passe la parole à notre collègue.
And now I'll give the floor to Mrs. Riano. Mrs. Briano. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you also, Dr. Vella. My question has already been raised by other colleagues, but I think that dealing with the environment and dealing with the fisheries can be a great opportunity, because you're bringing together a productive activity, but also looking at the aspects of sustainability. On the Fisheries Committee, we're dealing with a rather tricky file already that colleagues have touched upon, and this concerns the use of certain fishing gear, in particular the drift nets. And the earlier committee, the last Parliament, had to put forward a proposal for taking a precautionary approach and was suggesting the prohibition of the use of these drift nets. Now, we would like to look both at sustainability using environmental data, which will come for us in our point of view, but also want to look at these social and employment dimensions of this at the same time. And so we need to understand from you what your approach is, above all your willingness to work with us if there's further data coming from member states, so that we can deal together with this issue. Thank you.
Yes, and I think this point was already raised by someone earlier and I think I can repeat when I say that I agree, and I mentioned earlier on that there is a general concern about this issue. It was raised by a number of members of Parliament that I had met in Strasbourg and in Brussels, and their idea is that a total ban is totally, for them, perhaps not the best solution, and that there might be some other measures through which we can perhaps get the same results. As I said earlier on, the Commission proposal was only a start of a legislative proposal, and which requires now a transparent debate between in Parliament and also in the Council. And obviously the Commission will then take a stakeholder's view on all this. And as I said earlier on, I will continue to listen carefully, because at the moment that is the only thing that the Commission can do and perhaps even play an important role in facilitating the discussions and the analysis both by the Council and by the European Parliament as well. You also mentioned the girls, and I think, yes, even girls, there is a different characteristic, different effects that they have on the protected species, and there are different uses of their conditions and so on. But I think that even in girl, we cannot take the one-size-fits-all approach, and this is where even regionalization can play an important part as well. So I think that any of the proposals should be supported by solid assessments, both environmental assessments and also economic and economic assessments as well.
Je passe la parole à...
And I give the floor to someone I call Annie. I don't know if I can pronounce her surname. Ch13
Thank you very much, Chairman. A few brief questions. How does the Commissioner-designate intend to deal with the exemption that applies, for example, for the Dutch fishers when it comes to exemptions for the length of boats? How are you going to resolve that issue? The second question is, how do you deal with new methods of capture, like electronic pulse fishing? That's a very important issue today, and these are things that are really at discussion in the elections. What about the social economic effect of Natura 2000, the national implementation? How is that going to be dealt with? I think there's too much on the left wing. I'm behind Juncker more, but in the Netherlands, for example, we have these huge areas where the judges have to decide over things. It's all sorts of support being provided, and then nobody can get permits for this and that, for tourism, things like that. And really the implementation of these issues need to be drawn up as an inventory, and then we can start and do something with that. The speaker's microphone's cut off.
Désolé.
Sorry.
Yes, again, lots of but even if you were not allowed to ask them here, we can always come back and meet and we can discuss anything that... But I think the most important point also that you mentioned, which perhaps was not mentioned earlier on, was the question of pulse fishing. Again, this is a debatable issue. At the moment, I know that it is being used a lot in one particular country. It is still being used as a pilot project, which is allowed under the CFP. And there are various perspectives about this pulse fishing. First of all, there is the perspective that it is an innovative technique which avoids unwanted catch, and it also limits the negative environment impacts on the ecosystem, because you don't need to troll the very bottom of the seas. But again, then there are various different views as well that the electric pulses might be giving negative impacts on the vertebra of the fish and so on. So there is this always debate, pro and con. On this particular thing, however, I got some information that even some conservative environmentalists, NGOs, had positive comments about it as well, even one of the biggest environmentalist organization. The scientific advice about harm done to the other fish, vertebrates and so on is not confirmed. The harm done to other fishes is not confirmed as yet by the scientific advice. On the contrary, the scientific advice seems to imply that there is no problem, provided that the pulses are done under strict conditions.
Je passe la parole à notre collègue.
And now, Ms. Aguilera.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Vella. Although I've heard something about this already, I simply wanted to ask you once again about coastal fishing. It is something very important for my country, particularly Spain, that is to say, and I think it's very important for it to be part of fisheries policy that there has to be a distinction in favor of coastal fishing, artisanal coastal fishing, and furthermore, it requires protection because it generates jobs locally and has a limited environmental impact. But now with regard to third state agreements, I am in agreement. We need them. We need them very much in Spain, particularly Morocco, with Morocco. For example, this evening, after 2.5 years, and since the 16th of September, since the Moroccan fleet of 15 boats is out, but they've been blocked in Moroccan waters, and in the case of Mauritania, it's important to close this type of agreement, conclude this type of agreement, particularly in order to deal with the issue of cephalopods. Thank you very much.
Yes, with regards to coastal communities and small-scale fishing, I think before coming and to that and repeating myself, maybe some few comments about the SFPAs with Morocco. With Mauritania, I think we just spoke about Mauritania. With regards to Morocco, I agree that this is another important SFPA with Morocco, and I can promise that I can continue with all my efforts to continue having these sorts of SFPAs with Morocco and any other third country. Fishing opportunities are given to some 11 member states, if I'm not mistaken, with regards to the Morocco agreement. And the most important thing is that there are a number of artisanal and small-scale fisheries which also depend a lot on this agreement, especially vessels from two member states which are getting a lot of fishing opportunities from this agreement as well. I think that the new protocol with Morocco has just been finalized, and the fishing opportunity has increased by some 30%, if I'm not mistaken. At least that was the information that I was given. But if you tell me it's not the right figure, I promise that I will check again. But again, with regards to this SFPA, I think that it is not only important that we reach an agreement, and once the agreement is reached, we, forget all about it until such time that it comes up for renewal. I think even here, the implementation aspect and the monitoring aspect has got to be on the forefront as well. So rather than simply making an agreement and forget about it, I think we should continue to monitor that all the environmental and economic are being observed.
And finally, for the Fisheries Committee, I'll give the floor back to President Mato.
Thank you, Chair. Last time I take the floor, I won't put a question back, but I just ask. I'm not asking much. We want respect for the European Parliament, and we want respect for Parliament's powers. And secondly, we will work a lot better in that way. We'll get better results. And we want the decision concerning the implementation of this CFP. We want to have an impact on that because we worked on that reform. Let's be ambitious about the way we implement it when it comes to MSY, landing discards, helping small-scale fishing, aquaculture, ensuring respect for rigorous scientific reports. These are more than just fine words. These are a responsibility, serious commitment from you. Also to dialogue with us, but more in particular with the advisory councils. And above all, what we need is transparency. I believe, as you said at the beginning, that we're not asking for a great deal. But anyway, I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know how active you are in this area, and I rest assured that I will count on the experience that people like you in here have got about this industry. When we talk about the implementation of the CFP, I agree 100% with you. I think that the reform of the CFP was intended to benefit and to cater for all interests, be they economic and be they environmental as well. I also appreciate the input that came from you, the members of Parliament, of the European Parliament, because the European Parliament played a very decisive role with the Council on this reform, and the only way now forward is to implement it in the most effective way. We have to turn this reform into reality. Implementation, as you said, Mato, it's all about implementation. I think it is important to achieve MSY. MSY should be achieved 2015, latest 2020. As I have already said, the sooner the better. We have to implement and see and give more leeway to the regionalization aspect. There is the TAC and quota, which for some areas and regions will be for the first time done through the multi-annual plans. Discard plans, technical measures, the international aspect, which we have been discussing, is a very important aspect of the reform as well. And the idea is that out of this CFP, it is both the environment, which comes out as winner, but also we need to make certain that even the fishermen come out as winners as well. Because at the end of the day, it is an environmental exercise, it is economic exercise where the sustainability, where the interests of sustainability for the economic, environmental and social will have to be there.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes the questions concerned solely with fisheries, but there's still 3 questions on integrated maritime policy. I'd like to welcome here Mr. Kramer, Chairman of the Transport Committee, and I'd like then to give the floor to Mrs. Rosenberg for a question on this front.
Thank you, Mr. President. I prefer to speak in my language, Greek.
Mr. Vella, as you know, within the European Union, the blue economy, that of seas, in other words, represents 5.5 million jobs and creates added value of approximately 500 million annually. The prospects which the sea can offer to the European economy are huge, facilitating development, creating jobs in coastal regions of the European Union. Transport, tourism, energy, fishing are all there. The strategy for blue development is strategic for Europe as far as creating sustainable development in the maritime sphere, but there are very few targeted actions for employment here. As new commissioner, how would you secure that this particular strategy would not be simply dead word, but would contribute to sustainable development and the creation of jobs, strengthening coastal regions of the European Union? Will you undertake certain initiatives to create quality jobs for coastal tourism? And the microphone has been cut. Thank you.
No, désolé.
Sorry. Commissioner, Mr. Vella, you have the floor.
Monsieur Vella, s'il vous plaît.
Okay, merci. Ποιες δράσεις σκοπεύετε?
Which actions do you intend to?
Thank you.
No, sorry, your time's out. I know it's extremely frustrating. It can be. I know some people get a bit agitated. Unfortunately, we have to respect the rules of the game. I think we understood the drive of your question there, the thrust. Mr. Vella, you have the floor.
You want more time, I want less time, because... but yes, with regards to, you spoke about the blue economy and so on, which is one of the ways that we can drive future economic growth taking into consideration, as I mentioned before, the whole potential of the oceans and the seas and so on. The maritime policy objective is to manage these oceans that we're talking about into a more sustainable way and to use their potential at the same time. So there are challenges and there are objectives. There is the economic objective to get growth from the oceans, to get jobs related to the oceans, but there is also the challenge that we have to protect these oceans and these seas as well. Earlier on, I mentioned the private sector as well, and I think that even here the private sector has got to play a very important part. And when you asked how are you, what will you be doing to create jobs, actually we can only facilitate and make it easier for the private sector to create those jobs. So I don't think that any government has got a remit to create directly the jobs, but any government and like any institution like that. And I think we can help a lot the private sector by, first of all, making certain that the infrastructure, the right infrastructure is there, the right access is there to our ports, to our coastal and maritime areas, by removing a lot of bottlenecks which are not enticing to private investor, access to finance, skills, labor skills, so on and so forth. So there are ways how we can facilitate to the private sector, for the private sector to create jobs.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Now give the floor to Mr. Kyrkos.
Chairman, Mr. Vella, my question concerns blue development. Recently in Greece there's been discussion about a piece of draft legislation for the protection of coastal areas. But contrary to the deceptive title, all of this seems to serve basically chaotic development for tourism at the expense of the environment. A number of people realize, of course, the pressing need for development in the transport sector. For example, we see Chinese investments in European ports. That all of this, of course, is associated with the skirting of workers' rights, worker protection, because all of this isn't to the interest of people who are investing, of course. So I wanted to ask you, as former Minister of Tourism, how would you deal with all of this, and how would you strike a balance between economic growth, environmental and social viability? So sometimes the 28 member states are not in favor of voting for legislation which would create the necessary protection. What is your position on all of this? Thank you very much.
I think the issues that you raised were, okay, do not directly fall under my remit, especially when we're talking about labor rights and so on, but I do concur and I fully agree that at the end of the day, if we're talking about sustainability and if we're continuously saying that sustainability is about the environment, it's about the economy and it's about the social aspect, so I think we cannot talk about environment and economy alone without talking about the social aspect as well. When we're talking about the social aspect, I'm not talking only about the improvement of the labor standards and so on, but the fact that we will be going into the creation of more jobs, for me that is a social target which I think all of us should be working towards that. And I do hope that policies in the future, policies coming out of the Commission will, I am certain that most of them will be related to this growth and to this creation of jobs. From my end, I am certain that when I'm talking about blue growth, when I'm talking about the green growth, there is always this social element in mind that we have to cater for more jobs. And if they are sustainable jobs, we cannot only talk about the jobs, but we have to start talking about the quality of the jobs as well. But that is something that I have to work with other commissioners on that. And I am sure that as part of the team of this new Commission, I will be able to do that. Also, if need be, I can always concur and recur to your assistance and to your support.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Vella. To conclude, Mrs. Meissner.
Merci, Monsieur Président. Vella, I'm here. Okay. So my question goes to blue growth as well. Blue growth is something, job potential on marine energy, on aquaculture, coastal tourism, and blue biotechnology, and seabed mining was mentioned already before. And of course, there will be more vessels on the sea, and so it's a job potential as well. And it must be done in a sustainable way. That's what you said. I absolutely agree. And we just said because of that, the maritime spatial planning, and this process was absolutely difficult for the member states, because the member states didn't want to say that it must be done in an eco-based approach, ecosystem-based approach in a sustainable way, and they didn't want to have data exchange. And only with the help of the Commission and the negotiator from Greek, it was finally possible to agree on that. So my question goes to you, very simple but difficult. How can you ensure that the member states do what they signed?
I think we go back to the implementation that we had discussed earlier on. As I said, it's no use making policies, it's no use making plans, no use coming up with legislation unless the implementation is there. And this is something I got to know from my experience in the private sector, because the private sector doesn't tick your successes by the number of plans that you present, but by the implementation and the results of those plans. So if we are going to meet and draw plans and draw up policies, and then we do not implement those policies, then we'll end up like a debating society. We don't need that. What we need is draw up concrete plans with the right and the clear objective based on good scientific data, as you said, having an ecosystem, a resource efficiency approach, and then most important of all is that we start implementing them. Marine research can help a lot in this regard as well. I know that even when we had met, we had discussed a number of things, especially marine research, the fact that we cannot build a future economy on assumptions. We cannot build a future economy on what we read, on what I think, on what he thinks, on what she thinks. We have to build a sustainable future economy on facts, facts which probably only good readers